Welcome back to Reimagine 2021 version 11, our virtual conference series, bringing you nothing but the best projects, bright minds, and leaders in the space with a focus on what's up next. My name is Miguel Vazquez, and up next with us today is Christoph Gugelmann and Billy Sebell, CEO of Tradeteq and head of ecosystem development for the XDC network. Tradeteq launched in 2018 and lets originators package trade finance products into standardized investments, which can be bought and sold via private networks and sold as common fixed income products. Mr. Gugelmann, Tradeteq just executed the first non-fungible token-based invoice financing trade on XinFin's XDC blockchain. For those watching who might be a little less financially savvy, can you explain why this is a groundbreaking development in the blockchain and DeFi space?
Well, what we're doing is we are converting off-chain assets into on-chain token, which represents the whole pool. Now, if you think in terms of trade finance assets, trade finance is fundamental to the whole economy. It's kind of like the lifeblood for the economy. And these instruments very often come in very granular form. They're very low risk. They are yieldy. And if you want to access them, you don't want to go and have like 100,000 invoices, which you purchase one by one, but you would like to kind of like hold a token which represents, that pool of invoices.
Okay, and Mr. Sebell, maybe you can talk a little bit about how XinFin's XDC blockchain actually works. And I know that there's a little bit of the forensic monitoring that's going on that's a little bit of a breaking edge level that people aren't really doing yet.
Yeah, and the forensics is something new that's in the process of being implemented right now as a protocol. But the network itself is we're a hybrid blockchain network, so we have both private and public chains. The public XDC network is a fork of Go Ether, and the private side, which we set up private subnets, is fork of Quorum. And those two are connected by a relay bridge where you can transmit a limited set of data from the private side to the public side, creating the immutability of the transaction. And we're really an enterprise grade and enterprise really ready blockchain. That's one of the reasons we're working with Tradeteq right now on these transactions. And we've really, from the technology side, we've taken a smart contracts tokenization platform that we've created, and we've enabled the process to really be done really with pretty simple ease to really get to a NFT, which is really what we tokenize the trade assets with.
Yeah, definitely. Now, let's talk a little bit about in these proof of stake type environments, there has been a large amount and risk, I guess. There's been a large amount of risk in terms of fraud and something called slashing, which is what I saw when I was reading about this. Can we talk a little bit about how maybe what slashing is and how it presents a unique risk to enterprise level clients and people dealing with that kind of amount of crypto?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things there to kind of break out. So we are a delegated proof of stake consensus mechanism. We have roughly 200 nodes which are currently running on the network. We have those are a mix of master nodes and standby nodes. The master nodes work as validators for the transactions. And, slashing is a mechanism that happens if there's an issue with a particular node. The forensics model, which, we're in the process of installing, is really looking at it from the standpoint of really, simply put, kind of being that the network itself has its own kind of sheriff and judiciary, where any nodes that start acting in any malicious way are immediately identified and slashed from the network so as to not cause any issues within the network. So one thing about most consensus mechanism protocols is, you'll hear about a 51% attack. And this is obviously, where somebody gets control of 51% of the nodes. The XDC network, that number, in order for anybody to actually cause any kind of attack, would have to be 75% of all of the nodes. So, we're beyond, where you would ever or typically be in terms of a 51% attack. And, with the value of the network being what it is today, those nodes right now are in total are roughly about $2 billion in value. So it's not an easy climb for anybody to come in and get 75% of the nodes on the network to really cause that kind of issue.
Yeah, you're gonna need that's a big whale, right? So I saw that over there XDC's calling it blockchain 4.0.
Yep.
And it does I didn't see the 75% number, but I did see that it eliminates the malicious nodes and solves that Byzantine fault problem. It's really easy for a layman to understand, the 51% problem. Is it easy to explain how we got to how y'all got to 75%, or is it one of those things where you kind of need a little bit of?
Yeah, I'm not, I guess honestly, I'm not sure I'm the one who could get into the technical aspects of what we did to really get there. I would say that, one of the things and really the focus behind what we're doing is because we're enterprise focused, we are, really we're focused on creating a military grade blockchain. And that's really what our enterprise clients need. And so, when we had originally gone into, like I said, we're a fork of Go Ether, but, we've made significant changes, within, the ecosystem in order to speed up transactions significantly, as an example, or, to 2,000 transactions a second, or, instant finality, or, finality within 2 seconds. And so those are examples of things that we've been doing within the ecosystem in order to really make it more robust and scalable. And, we're working on, increasing those numbers as well. So I think that, we're really focused on really trying to solve the security and the scalability and the speed piece really all at the same time, because those are things that are really necessary when you're, in an enterprise environment.
Sure. And I guess the natural question that flows from that, because when you start talking about consensus mechanisms and things of that nature, the next question people love to ask is, how are we going to make sure that that's decentralized? But I'm almost assumptive in an enterprise environment that decentralization is something of less of a concern in those realms. Am I correct? And maybe you could speak to
that. No, I would say that we're highly focused on decentralization. I think that one of the ways I think this is one of the things that I should say, I'm not sure people, even within the community at large, really fully understand like the process of what we're trying to go through in terms of becoming more decentralized. But I think it's important for the distinction between consensus mechanisms and maybe a proof of work, and the idea behind one being more centralized or one being more decentralized. We looked at it, and there's definitely a certain measure of or degree of challenges you have with enterprises. When you're looking at how do you do this, and do it in a way where enterprises feel comfortable with what we're trying to develop. And I think that the key is for us is we've looked at a goal of 300 nodes that would be operating on the network, that would be part of that ecosystem that we had established in conversations with a lot of industry people as being a fairly decentralized form of node governance. And then outside of that, we're looking at it from the organization side, as being a DAO. What are the things that we're doing on a decentralization perspective to really move the network forward. So, we have a platform that's in development for voting mechanisms, where we've brought in, thought leaders and specialists in terms of looking at how a decentralized model can really work in this environment. And, we have these conversations with our partners as well. So, there's no real straight path to it. I think the important thing is, and this is just, from my perspective, since I've been involved in crypto and just in general with the project, is, there's really kind of an ethos behind how we actually really try to operate. That's really about the good of the whole. So we don't make decisions based on, oh, this is good for one project or another project, or this is good for an individual. We're looking at decisions that we make right now as how is this good for everyone that's going to be participating, and how can we continue to create greater decentralization. So we look at models of governance. We look at how we can bring, the community together into this platform. And, we're looking at releasing our DAO voting platform in the coming months. And so, that's going to be able to expand a lot greater, measure of decentralization for people in the network. As it is now, there really is an open invitation for anybody in the community to come in and be a part of, the XinFin community. And, we have groups that work together to really try to make the best decisions, for the network in general. So it's a process. You can't. I don't know if anybody can just start at day one and say, hey, we're decentralized. You have to start somewhere, and you got to kind of build to it. And I think what's important is, who are you in the building of it? And that's really, to me, the most important aspect of it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because when somebody has an idea and they set out to start a project, and it's just one person, I mean, that's the ultimate centralization, right? You have a single point of failure.
Yeah.
So I think everybody's very excited about, the inclusivity, bringing the ability for people just to have their voices heard in these ways that they haven't before is very exciting to a lot of people in the space. And so I did see that XinFin, or XDC, was recently selected as the first blockchain and cryptocurrency company to join something called the Trade Finance Distribution Initiative. And maybe we can talk about that ethos that y'all are trying to cultivate in-house. How, because I think that would be a great thing to promulgate across the whole sector. Maybe the TFD can do this?
Yeah, I can maybe take this. So the TFD initiative is really there in order to build an infrastructure which allows to make trade finance tradable. If you think about trade finance today, we are talking about 7 trillion plus minus of bank intermediated trade finance. Pretty much everything which gets financed by banks. Now, of those banks, only about 25 banks roundabout, globally, those are intermediating 2/3 of that volume. So it's highly concentrated, highly centralized process. And what that means is that if these banks have no capacity, then, well, the corporates will suffer, and that's a classical way of kind of where, a centralized financial system comes really to its limits. And what we are doing with the TFD initiative, and why we are, kind of pushing it, including anyone, it's completely open, is to create a secondary infrastructure for sellers of assets and investors. That market has never really worked that well outside of the bank to insurance space. There was no bank to capital market space at all. And the reason why that was the case is the friction costs are incredibly high, in this very operational intense asset class. So in the past, you had to be highly specialized to deal with tens of thousands, millions of invoices to be able to process them, and also then cater for institutional investors or individual investors, retail investors, to be able to access those assets. And through technology, and that is what the TFDI is really has as the central mission, is to create, now access for everyone, to automate processes, to reduce these friction costs, and therefore let liquidity flow from anyone through banks, away from banks, to corporates where it is essentially needed.
That's very, very, very exciting. There are some platforms online that try to do that already in a very, very small scale. But I do know that the major hurdle there is those, like you said, 25 banks. How do we work on getting them to our side? Is that just what the TFD is?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you absolutely correctly said before, there are initiatives, there are small platforms which operate often in single markets. In trade finance, you have to acknowledge that if you are operating in a jurisdiction, I don't know, you're in Denmark, in Finland, wherever you are, you will be bound by local law. You will, if someone doesn't pay, you will have to enforce under local law. So it's very hard for someone to build this from scratch, and kind of operate it globally. And so far, no one has really done this. You will need to work around in order to get an effect and include also the large players, and that's what the TFT initiative is doing. So there are some of the world's leading commercial banks are part of this initiative, and many of the 25 I mentioned before are part of this, and there are also a lot of asset managers which are interested to participate. Some investors will come in and participate on a more traditional notes basis or through assignments. But where we want to take it now is with the XDC network, of course, is to tap into the decentralized distribution space, into retail, into high net worth, and create an asset class which we feel also is unique in the crypto space, in the stablecoin space, where we have seen a lot of kind of asset pools which are backed by crypto, which are backed by nothing. In some, we're not really sure whether it's backed by anything, some commodity, but very limited kind of like access, provides today very limited access to a low risk asset class, which is kind of globally relevant, where no government can influence it. It's inflation proof. It represents kind of global purchasing power if you have enough of a trade finance pool, and therefore you make it very attractive. It's a very attractive asset class as a reserve as well.
So when we're talking about these asset classes, this trade finance, maybe we could break down, because when I, as somebody who doesn't have a whole lot of financial experience, especially in the enterprise space, I think of asset classes and I think of WTI, I think of pork, I think of corn futures or something like that. Maybe we can talk about what trade finance really is, and then why the NFTs, the tokenized, the non-fungible stuff, why that's that real solution for those millions and millions and millions of receipts that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, so trade finance has quite a traditional component, which is very much centered around banks, where as an importer of goods, you would have gone to your local bank. So a Tunisian importer goes to the local Tunisian bank and says, I want to buy a good. Can you guarantee the payment? That you kind of represent that I'm going to make that payment. And then there would be maybe a German exporter and having a German bank, a confirming bank, and then through these kind of like four-party guarantee mechanism, the trade was secured and risk has been taken out of the equation for everyone. But we have moved quite quickly now with the emergence of technology, better transparency, into a world where mostly is done actually in terms of transaction number through so-called open account. So that means I'm going to ship you a good and I give you 90 days to pay. And the payment terms is actually one part of my selling process to make my good attractive to you, such that maybe if you're going to resell it, you have the time to hold it as inventory until you find the buyer on your side as a reseller. So the problem is that sellers of goods, if they have to wait 90 days until they get paid, well, this is cash out of my pocket, and I need someone to finance it. And so far they have gone exclusively, almost exclusively to the banks, and the banks would service their biggest customers for kind of like large amounts, but very often or almost always the so-called tail suppliers. These are the small suppliers of a Walmart, for example, or the small buyers. They will get no access to trade finance. So these are the two differences. It's a kind of the traditional, more letters of credit is called bank business, and now the so-called open account, which is really kind of receivables, where an invoice can be paid in 90 days, and someone kind of prepays it upfront.
Yeah, ironically, that's one of the problems that Nakamoto was intending to solve when he started Bitcoin, I believe, was that intransient kind of non-settled, these dollars really only exist on a banking ledger somewhere. So indeed, I was unaware that there was even that kind of disparity in the commercial space, that smaller players were being left out of this trade finance. So it sounds like this is even good for some smaller commercial players or enterprise players.
Yeah, and I think that's where it absolutely comes to. If you think about a value chain, right? So you have a Walmart, a dominant large player, so it has maybe large suppliers. So these suppliers will get access to trade finance, also senior unsecured finance. It's very easy for them to get access to capital markets. But now you go all the way down, to at the end of the supply chain, to maybe someone who produces, some food or articles, or, maybe a shop of 10, 12, 13 people. They will have no access to trade finance, although they have an asset which they ship, which is as good as if Walmart would ship it themselves. And they will have to go and fund themselves, maybe with equity, or maybe with expensive loans, credit card overdrafts, etc. So the smaller SMEs will have to work so much harder to actually make a living and be innovative and make sure they can actually exist, compared to some of the larger companies. Now, if the larger companies have better supply chains, so kind of have better financed suppliers, they're also going to win. So if you democratize this process of access to trade finance across small and large companies, everyone will win in this, and we'll have smoother supply chains, and we'll create a lot more jobs out there.
Yeah, it sounds like something we actually need in the current moment, like right about right now, actually.
Yeah. We've actually needed it for a long time. I think, people don't realize how small businesses have really suffered just across the globe. Like Christoph is saying, your only opportunity is local banking markets. The whole point of what we're really trying to do in working with Tradeteq and the TFD is we're trying to open this up across the globe. So it doesn't really matter where you are. If you're a small business, the information that's necessary in order to be a part of a trade can be digitized, and you can find somebody who can finance that for you halfway across the globe, as opposed to worrying about only being limited to the local bank or the banks, around the corner from you.
Yeah, this sounds like the platform that I had in mind earlier. I believe it's called Kiva, where it's basically peer-to-peer lending. You kind of go, okay, I'm going to give this out, and then they kind of say, okay, well, we're not going to necessarily guarantee that, but if you get stiffed, we'll give you 95% of your loan back. And I've got this word floating around in my head, and I don't know if it's appropriate or not. But this sounds a lot like a situation, and I'm not too familiar with it, but I've heard something called a bundiwala, maybe, in certain parts of the world. Is this something that they used to do? Can anybody maybe know anything about that? No?
Yeah, so if you think about the process of giving someone trade finance, what that means is not just that you have to extend, so you have to make the payment For this, you need to know who you're going to pay. You will receive it from a buyer back at some point. So you need to make sure that you get your payment back. So you need to collect it. You also need to work it out, if a buyer doesn't pay for whatever reason. So someone needs to go and enforce it. And beside the KYC, AML, and all these activities, there is also the pooling aspect. If I would come to you with one invoice from one company somewhere, around the world, you would say, what am I missing? Why are you coming to me with this? But if I'm going to come and say this is a representative portfolio of, 15,000 European companies, then you would say, well, this is a European portfolio, and it becomes much more palatable to sell it. So the pooling aspect is important, and all of that is kind of lost in the P2P space. If in the traditional forms, there it's usually someone who has a proprietary algorithm which no one knows exactly how it works, and they say, it's kind of a good risk, and they just channel it through to someone else on a name-by-name basis. So that's a bit more challenging, just because we are dealing here with an asset class which has slightly more complexities. It's not just the credit risk, it's also the so-called dilution risk. That means if someone ships the wrong colors of TVs, to the buyer, then the buyer is not going to pay, and the funder doesn't get his money. So you need to take all of these things into consideration. You can only really mitigate that risk by pooling it, diversifying it, and for this you need bigger setups to do it. And I think that's maybe an answer to your question about the P2P model.
Yeah, absolutely. That was how I understood that some of these things worked, and that Bundiwala aspect, I don't even know if I'm describing it correctly, was an older form of that, like kind of in the desert and stuff. I wasn't even aware of all of the sorts of, like you're talking about, that dilution risk and all these other sorts of things where, the big banks, it makes a lot of sense why they wouldn't get involved in, the speculation play, but all of these other sorts of things definitely play out into fleshing out the actual infrastructure of the space so that it is more likely that we get, a Merrill Lynch or somebody actually utilizing blockchain in their day-to-day practices. And then that legitimizes the whole space. Maybe we can talk a little bit about if XDC's blockchain is any different than other, and how that private and public kind of division works, and how it can increase trust in an enterprise space.
Yeah, well, as far as kind of going back first, I would say to what Christoph was talking about with dilution or workout, any of the issues that come up with within an actual trade instrument. The smart contract platform, tokenization platform, takes all of those into account. So there are methods or standards that are built into this so that there are the ability to work out a situation and handle those types of situations. And I think that, so what I would say, how that kind of leads into what your question is now, is that, we've really, we've really focused our efforts in bringing blockchain to enterprise, not trying to bring enterprise to blockchain. So when we look at our developments that are built on top of the network, like the smart contracts tokenization platform, we're looking at how can we make this very simple and easy for an enterprise to come to a platform and operate it as if they're essentially operating off of any other web interface. And then the trade and everything that happens behind it is executed by the contract. So we're really looking at it, and we always have, as trying to bring blockchain to legacy systems. And we're really part of a technology stack that Tradeteq and has been building with the TFD. Where we're a solutions provider within that. There are other providers that are there for digitization, or other needs. But from the blockchain itself and what's happening with this trade, it's really important for us to kind of create that bridge. As far as the privacy of it, what happens on the transaction side in this platform, it's a white label platform. It's a platform that is used by Tradeteq specifically. This is a platform that can also be customized for other more specific types of trades, that may want to do things there's let's say there's a contract structure that somebody wants to have for construction, or a project that they want to have going on. We could actually take the platform and we could customize it for that specific need. And so whether it's the platform that Tradeteq is using or the platform that this other entity might be using, those are all operating on a private subnet, and then the transaction details of when it happened, the date, time, value, all of those things are what would be transferred to the public side. So that's where you have kind of that bridge working between private and public.
Definitely. And it makes a lot of sense, especially when we're talking about some of those types of risks that are definitely going to be corporate secrets, sorts of trade sensitive information that enterprise scale entities don't necessarily want everybody's eyes on, right? So I guess we can go ahead and move over to the more pointed kind of general crypto questions, unless there's anything, Mr. Gugelmann, I didn't get to touch on in terms of Tradeteq that you'd like to talk about. I'm really still wrapping my head around what the whole, the trade finance thing is. I think I've got a pretty solid grasp on it now. But can we talk about maybe some more risks that might, and then we'll move over into more crypto stuff. Some more risks that might really make enterprise level players very, very nervous in terms of getting involved in the crypto space that they've already got figured out. Like, what are some problems that we've got?
Yeah, specific to trade finance. I mean, trade finance is like any other commercial asset class. It has different characteristics and comes with different forms of risks. Here, obviously, you have two counterparties. If for mortgages, you would have one counterparty, and you might have some explicit collateral, which is a house. In trade finance, you have a buyer, you have a seller, and of course, there is the risk that these two sides could kind of like collude and defraud you. Banks are quite good at picking this up. They have a very good history in avoiding fraud, although it still can happen. The dilution risk is one which always has to be kind of kept in mind. Again, if you deal with transactions and counterparties for a considerable amount of time, you will pick those up. And you have a good grip on it, and then there is the credit risk. Having said that, the risk for trade finance actually, and there are some statistics out there, is very, very low. And the yield which you can achieve is actually way above the risk commensurate risk you are taking. And the reason for that is you are actually, as an investor, you are sharing into the commercial benefits. So make this kind of like a little bit more tangible. If you could kind of ship and, kind of like if you sell TVs and I sell you TVs and you won't sell these TVs, and every time you make 20 or 30% margin, well, if you could do twice the amount, then you would make on twice the amount 20 to 30% margin, right? So it's very, very tangible. You would clearly not be that sensitive when you pay 5 or 10 basis points more on the financing. So that's where a lot of the value is coming from. And again, I think the banking risk is a statistic which gets collected amongst all banks by a neutral organization, and it's about 2 to 3 basis points of loss rate on about 10, 15 billion or trillion measured so far. This is very, very low. So this makes it an extremely attractive asset class. It's as I said, it's inflation proof, and we think that it is an ideal collateral, an ideal reserve for a stable coin collateral, since it can also be structured in a way where you make it open for everyone to contribute collateral within certain guidelines and parameters, such that you also don't have centralization around this reserve pool. So it's an ideal asset class. It's also short term. It's self-liquidating, these instruments. They are usually US dollar based. Almost all of trade globally is done US dollar denominated. I think that the benefits massively outweighs the risk I outlined, which of course have to be monitored as well.
Yes, it definitely sounds like it's a way to bring something that was only available to extraordinarily banks, essentially, bring it down to a lower commercial environment, which is, I'm sure, very, very, very exciting for small business owners, because those types of things, those inflation-proof investments, highly sought after, right? Highly sought after. So let's go ahead and move over to the general questions about crypto, and then I'll give you all an outro on the way out. Let's go about 15 more minutes here. I don't want to run too long for y'all. We'll start off with El Salvador, and we can kind of ping back and forth through whoever wants to. This September, El Salvador made Bitcoin legal tender. What do you think about that decision, and the decision by the IMF when they labeled cryptoization a threat to the global economy?
Well, all right, I'll take a stab at those. I think actually early on, Christoph had alluded to the challenges in trade finance, where jurisdictionally, if you're doing something, let's put it this way: it's very difficult to do the same thing everywhere in the world, because regulations are different in every jurisdiction. And I think that you have to really start somewhere and build from there. I think as far as a country goes, with El Salvador, it's an example of a country that felt that it was more advantageous for them to look at having some other type of, maybe stable reserve for, their treasury. And that's how I perceive, what they've done there. And I think that how that kind of maybe speaks to what's going on around the globe is, we have obviously a lot of issues with global debt. And this is a real problem that's, continuing to, I think, be kicked down the road, raising debt ceilings and borrowing more and more money, by governments. And I think it creates a challenge where, people are looking for a way to, combat that and put themselves in a good footing. So I think that a blanket statement that cryptocurrency is bad for the monetary system may really come from the question of what is the use case, or who is actually bringing that cryptocurrency, or the ecosystem and development behind that. We're very clearly focused on how we can actually help the existing system operate better. And I think there's people who are far smarter than me that can try to figure out the problem with debt around the globe, but somehow I feel like there's an opportunity for the right work with cryptocurrencies to be kind of married into the fiat system in a way that helps resolve those issues and move us to a better overall more stable environment. So,
well, I was going to say that plays into some of the things that y'all are already doing. And my next question, in fact, was going to be about why do NFTs matter? And we've already talked about that a little bit. And I think that's one of the angles of cryptoization that maybe the IMF hadn't considered when they had made that kind of blanket statement. Maybe we can talk, I know we already have a little bit, but why NFTs matter, and then what some broader use cases are, including your own. We've already talked on, this can revolutionize the massive amounts of receipts and stuff that goes on in trade finance.
Yeah, well, I think really, to me, it's very interesting when you really break it down. I think a lot of the conversations we've had today, we're really, a lot of people like to talk about, trade finance. This is a huge industry. It's $19 trillion or $15 trillion, or, there's a lot of very large numbers that go along, with it. But as Christoph has pointed out, we're talking about the TV manufacturer that's sending product across the globe. The people that are looking for funding in what we're doing are real people who have businesses making clothing or electronics or, some other product or service that people need and are looking for across the globe. So I think that, there's a real human element to what it is that we're trying to do to help those people, everyone really across the globe, small to medium-sized businesses, really everywhere. And as far as, as when we're looking at it from the perspective of, how does that, or turning it into an NFT, what does that do? I think that really opens up a whole new market for people to come in and create new financing opportunities. And I think that, the idea of ownership and having that unique token, and then having certain qualities to it and permissions that allow you to execute according to a smart contract is really takes out a lot of the issues that you might normally have where, somebody's like, I've got an invoice and I got to get it paid, and can you pay it for me? And, or can you help me get the money now so I can, finance or continue my operation for another order tomorrow? And so I think it's very intertwined, really, between what it is that we're doing at a very human basic level for business, and now taking blockchain and really turning it into something of value that, like Christoph had said, you're taking a portfolio of these invoices and you're putting them together, and now you're creating something that has a lot more stability for investors to come in and finance, and the opportunity to generate yield, on that, I think is really a very unique characteristic of what we're doing right now today with our trade finance.
And then that kind of democratization of people when they come on in, and because everybody's really attracted to that yield, right? And we were talking earlier also about the DAOs that y'all have already kind of started to move towards. As more and more people come in, do you see DAOs becoming the new future of legal entities, or maybe this kind of organizational construct?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I mean, I think when you look at it, DAO is actually a term which, we have a lot of conversations. It's actually, maybe you could say it's kind of in vogue. Everyone's like, we're going to be a DAO. We're going to be a DAO. We're going to be a DAO. And, the question is what does it actually really mean, to be a DAO? And what we don't want to do is create chaos. We want to be able to create, an environment where people can come together and with proper information, and maybe even the proper related knowledge to be able to make a decision, to be able to sit here and say, okay, here's a governance model that I can participate in and I can take part in. I'm one part of the cog. And so, we really look at it, and I think, historically you can look at the even private businesses and how they've developed, over the years. this is really just the very beginning of what decentralization is really going to be for organizations. You know, the models moving forward, they're going to be an evolution from where we are today. It's not just going to be, let's have a voting platform. You know, there'll be models for, here's how you can actually start from the beginning, and here are different methods or models for having decentralization. So I think, to explain a little bit more, that this is not something I had gone into earlier, but you know, XinFin FinTech, which launched the XDC network initially as a private business out of Singapore, had always focused on building a foundation that would be nonprofit, that would support the development moving forward of the of the network. And so since the time that I've been with XinFin, you know, we've been working on you know, moving to a DAO structure through a foundation, which we've launched this year, called the XDC Foundation. And the XDC Foundation is really there to help develop the blockchain moving forward. So we have development and many ecosystem activities going on to build on top of what we're doing. And with that, that's the structure in which we're looking at, you know, how do we create this DAO? You know, how do we do the governance? And you know, how do we bring it to the community so that people who you know, want to be involved, you know, that there's an avenue for them to participate. And so it's a real evolution. And I think also with what we're doing with Tradeteq and the TFD, you know, that's, I kind of view it as it's an ecosystem unto its own as well, as part of what we're doing. So, you know, it's not just a matter of, here's technology and here's a bank. It's also a matter of, you know, how do you have all of the players come together, originators and investors and technology and the banks, and how do you bring everything together so that people can operate in an environment that is robust and supports what everybody's trying to create as an outcome? Because I think typically you would look at it, I don't think you would find banks easily working with banks previously, but now, you know, you've got consortium all over the globe where banks realize, you know, we need to work with each other. And so we're trying to evolve that ecosystem in really anywhere we can. And so I think that there's a lot to come, and probably what a DAO looks like in 5 years may be very different than what it looks like today.
Is it fair to say, and this just kind of popped up in my head, is it fair to say that DAOs are kind of bridging the gap between unions, what unions were in a non-digital environment, a completely analog environment, versus what unions can be in a digital environment? And I know that's kind of a dirty term. I'd hate to say the word union out loud, but I do know it's controversial, and I have seen very similar, the behaviors seem very similar to me. So maybe that's a place we're moving towards.
It's interesting. Oh, go ahead, Christoph.
I just think unions is just, you know, one part of the stakeholders of a traditional kind of like company. It represents the employees, but of course there are so many more stakeholders. And with, I think, DAOs, you actually can extend that stakeholder group, right? Anyone essentially who feels strongly about what you do can actually, in a perfect world, can actually, you know, acquire some influence, some governance tokens or whatever, however it's structured, to shape. The one thing though I would say with DAOs is you have to define kind of the game plan at the outset, and it becomes quite rigid to then change it entirely, right? You can allocate certain type of resources in the right direction, and you can have voting mechanism for certain things, but it will become difficult to completely change it. Whereas with a company, you have more flexibility. So that's why I think those will be suited for specific sets of the economy. And I'm 100% convinced it will go in that direction. And I think in others where you need to be very agile, you know, it might be less suited, you know, because you couldn't define that game plan right at the beginning. for all times.
Yeah, of course. Mr. Sebell, you got something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, I guess really, unions really came about because that was really, there was a need for workers' rights in work environment. And, and I think that it's kind of a little bit of an example of, something that has arisen out of a broken system, or really of people who were taking advantage of others. And so I think, the whole thing about a DAO is really about how everybody has an opportunity to really more equally participate from the beginning. So I think like the going back to the ethos, I think the ethos behind, what a DAO is very different, because the focus on it really is about democratization from the beginning. And that's not to say that it's centralized. There are many centralized organizations that are out there that are really working towards the good of the people who are in the organization, or all the stakeholders. And hopefully that's what you're always going to, be able to get. But I think that the beauty of a DAO is it's a constant reminder for, people in the space that we're really looking to build something that has that democratization built into it.
Awesome. Well, it's very exciting. Sounds very exciting for the future, especially for the future for small business owners, gaining access to some of these financial instruments that they may not have had any access to before. So thanks for all of us here. That's Mr. Billy Sebell, head of ecosystem development for the XDC network, and Mr. Christoph Gugelmann, CEO out at Tradeteq. Mr. Gugelmann was also formerly at Galena Asset Management and a managing director at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.